Okay, so welcome to the last lecture of 136. Just a quick reminder, everything is due next Monday. Means all 4 of your renderings, interior day, interior night, exterior day, exterior night. So 4 of those renderings, and then 2 of the 3 drawings. So plan, section, elevation, you pick 2 of those 3. It doesn't matter which 2. You're going to print each of those individually on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper. You don't have to do any fancy layout work, but I should get 6 11 by 17s from you. I do that so that I can have a big book of all the stuff that everybody does for the semester. It's a way of keeping track of semester to semester. I will grade the online posts, though. So you post all 6 of those images online, and I will grade the online versions. Because sometimes when you print them out, they end up being a little too dark, and you can't really see what's going on. So that's OK. I'll grade the online version. Do make sure that you include everything that I ask for. If you include more than that, that's perfectly fine. But make sure you hit everything. So for example, if you turned in 3 night renderings and 1 day rendering, right? Remember, they're supposed to be 2 day, 2 night. Let's say you turned in 3 night renderings and 1 day rendering. You'd miss that whole piece. And I noticed this on the last assignment. You guys will get current grade sheets today. That sometimes you guys just didn't turn in one of the required renderings. And if you didn't turn in the required rendering, you essentially are giving yourself a 0 on that portion of the assignment, which is bad. So we want to make sure that you check off the boxes. Okay? Yeah?
Can we throw in like kind of a brighter sunset scene as a day rendering, or do you want like?
Sure. So the sunset is kind of intermixed. I've heard the same question asked, can I use a sunset as a night scene? The answer is basically yes. I will count the sun scene toward the day, or the sunset toward the day, or I'll count it toward the night. Technically speaking, one of the sunset presets is more day because the sun is above the horizon. It's just long shadows. The other one, the sun is actually below, and you get a pink sky. So I would argue that that one's more night than the one where the sun's on the horizon, but it's kind of in the middle, so I'm OK with that, going either way. But you can't just turn in all night renderings, and you can't just turn in all day renderings. There's a reason that we have to do both. So today, I'm not going to talk that long, and I've written up tutorials about how to do this, but I've never actually done it live for anybody. So I figured I'd throw that in, but I'll keep it short so that you guys can just work, because that's ultimately what you need to spend your time with. Photoshop is not part of this class, so it's not required that you do any Photoshop post-processing to your work. I think the easiest way of describing Photoshop in relationship to V-Ray and rendering is that you could spend all of your time, let's say you had 10 hours to work. You could spend 10 hours working on getting the perfect V-Ray rendering. You could spend 10 hours faking it in Photoshop and not do a rendering at all. Or you could spend 5 hours, half the time, and get a better result by combining the 2. But it's teaching you guys to use Photoshop is beyond the scope of this class, which is why I hope you've taken 135. And if you haven't, maybe you go back and take it. But the idea is that long term, you'll be able to save yourself a bit by being able to combine things. So for example, if during a day rendering, you could install all of the individual little grass and render out all the grass, or you could find an image with some grass in it, throw it in there as a background, do a little clone stamp with the grass brush, and call it a day. So it's a time-saving sort of thing. There is something that we can do in post-processing, though, that I think is a pretty powerful technique that I want to show you and walk you through it. It's called Z-Depth. And it's one of the channels, the VFB channels, that we've turned on during the rendering. But it takes a little bit more finesse to set it up correctly. And it can make a big difference if you set it up correctly. So I'm going to walk you through 2 parts today. One part is actually setting up the correct settings for your Z-Depth. And the other part is actually how do you do the Photoshop part where you work with the Z-Depth. Essentially, what this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to change the focal length or what part of the image is blurred after the fact. So we'll do our rendering, and then we'll decide, do we want the background blurred out? Do we want the foreground blurred out? Some of those kinds of things. So the Z-Depth settings are specific for a given camera angle. So if I change my camera angle, my Z-Depth settings are going to change. And you'll need to make notes of what the settings are so that when you switch camera angles, you can switch the Z-depth to be appropriate. So first thing I need to do is in the rendering that I want to perform. So let's say I want to render in this particular view. I need to show the camera in this view. So I'll go to my set view, or excuse me, my set camera, and then show camera. So I'll turn the camera on so I can see it. It's not showing in this view, as it should, but it should be showing in another view. And I have another perspective view open here such that we can see the camera. So my camera is positioned floating out here in space, and it's looking back at my model this direction. If I think of this camera as where the camera actually is sitting, the position of the camera, there's a distance between here and the first edge of my building. And there's also a distance between this point and the rearmost edge of my building, or the furthest point that I would want in focus, which could be way out here, or it could be reasonably short. It's going to be up to you to determine how far it is. And so what I'll do with that is I need to know what the distance is between this point and my closest object. So I'm going to use the distance command. So I'll type in distance. And I'm going to measure from this point, I have my point snap on, from this point to my closest object. So we'll say it's right about there. I'm not overly worried about it being on an angle. I'm just trying to get an approximate. This is telling me that it's 93 inches or so. So I'll make a note with my pen that magically disappeared of 93 inches. And it's approximate, 90 inches, whatever. We're close enough. Then I'll take another measurement from the camera position to the rearmost object. So it's maybe back out here somewhere. 720 inches. Now I'll round that up to maybe 800 inches. So I've taken those two distances, and now in my V-Ray options, so let's go back to the render that I'm ultimately going to make, this one. I'll go to my V-Ray options, and I'm going to open up under the VFB channels here. The very bottom, there's something called Z-Depth. I'm going to set my Z-Depth. The close value, or the black value, is the closer distance. So that was 93. My white value is the furthest away that I want to go. And so in this case, it was about 800. So I type in 800. I want to make sure that I uncheck clamp and I uncheck set from camera. The unchecking set from camera is really important because we don't want it tied to the camera. We're just going to do the Z-depth. At this point, I'm going to do a small rendering to test my settings. So I'll drop this to 100, like that, and we'll go ahead and do a small rendering to test my settings. Almost done. There we go. So I know it's blurry, but it's just a test here. And under my channels here, we're seeing the default is the RGB color. And you guys have explored these before. You've seen the alpha before. One of those is called Z-Depth. And if I have it set right and I click on Z-Depth, the closest object is going to be black, and the furthest object away from me is going to be white. And that's on purpose. The sky, we're not going to worry about the sky. So I've set this so that I've got this kind of grayscale version. I've got a few little artifacts happening in here that has to do with the texture of the patio here that I need to fix. But this, okay, is basically giving me an approximate value for what I want. If I change camera angles, and obviously at that point I would save all my channels. So let me open up that render frame again. This is the small version, so I'm not going to do it, but I would save all the channels using the multiple save icon. And then I would save it. I've already done it. I didn't want you guys to have to wait for the full renderings to go. But if I switch my view, so if I went and said, you know what, I really want to render, instead of that view, I want to render this view. Well, now suddenly the camera settings are completely different. So I need to once again go back to set view, or excuse me, set camera, show camera. Good. And now I can see in the perspective view, there's my camera. And so in this scenario, the close object, well, the close object is like right in front of me. It's maybe that post right there. So I'll type distance. That's maybe my closest object, something like that. 50 inches, could be even closer. And my far object is way out here at kind of the end of my patio there. That's at 380 inches. So I have a 50 and 380, which I just wrote down. Now I'll go back to this view. I'll go into my V-Ray options. I'll go back to my VFB channels, and this is going to change again. I could start at just 1, or I could start at 10. I can be even closer here. And my outermost value this time would be 380. Once those are set, I could do another small rendering. My rendering should still be set for small. There we go. And you guys can see how this one plays out. It's important to point out that the Z-depth doesn't show up as a progress. So as it's rendering, nothing's showing up here. It's still the old one until it's done doing the rendering. So you have to wait until the rendering completely finishes before you'll see it. So I'll wait for this one to come up just so you can see the contrast here. All right, so now it finished. And if I go to Z-Depth, we'll see the same thing here, where I start really close with the darkest color to the camera, and it goes out to be completely white way out at the horizon. So I'm getting that same gradient. But it's changed based on the new camera angle. So I have to set it before I do the render. Then when I save the render channel, I'll get that included with it. So what's the big deal? Why do I spend the time doing this in the first place? That's where Photoshop comes in and where post-processing comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll open up the color rendered version. Let me see. And I'll end up doing this twice. Let me make sure I get it correct here. So there's the color render in its large format. And when I do this, in order to make this whole thing happen, I'm going to follow a series of steps. This is, by the way, written out. If you go here, both of these are written out. If you go to V-Ray and then the very last one, 8.31, which of course isn't showing here. 8.31, this talks about how do you set up the distances and then where do you put those in. And then the other one is under Photoshop, it's 1.25, and that talks about what I'm going to do right now with setting it up in Photoshop. So in order to set this up, I have my original image that I've opened. I'm going to bring that same image in again. So I'll go to File and then Place Embedded to bring the same image in again. And I just have to find it. There it is. I bring it in, and I'll commit to it. So I have two versions of the same thing. I'm then on the second version here, I'm going to add a layer mask. So I click on the Add Layer Mask button down here at the bottom, and it gives me a layer mask on top of the duplicate, so to speak. The other alternative, if I didn't want to place it in, would be to just duplicate the layer. So let me delete it. I'll show it to you that way as well. I could just say, by selecting the background here, I could say duplicate layer. It gives me a copy, and then I'll add the layer mask. Either way, I just need a second version of the same image. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Open, and I'm going to open up that Z-Depth of the image. So there's the Z-Depth, again going from black to white being far away. And with this image open, I'm going to go ahead and select the whole thing, so Control A to select everything, and then Edit, Copy, or Control C. That copies this. I then want to put on the mask itself, I want to put that layer. And so I'm going to do that by jumping over into the channels and looking at the mask. There's the mask right there. And I will then paste this in. I'll go to Edit and then Paste. And it should drop in. It looks like I missed the very borders. That's a difference in the renders. That's fine. I can crop it later. I'll go back over, turn back on the rest of the channels here, and I'll go back over to here. Nothing has changed. It looks exactly the same, except for the mask here now has that background image on it. I don't believe that I can do it without jumping over into the channels, but let me try it just in case here. Let me be on the mask and see if it'll let me paste the mask. Yeah, it doesn't let you paste into the mask. So that's why I have to do it in the channels. So one more time, I've selected the mask. I'll jump over to the channels, turn the channels off so that I have just the mask, and then I'll paste it there. Turn the channels back on, and now there it is, pasted in. Okay, so now comes the magic part, or the fun part. I'm going to go on the background copy layer here. I'm going to go up to my filter. I'm going to go to blur, and I'm going to choose something called a lens blur. And with the lens blur selected, I'm going to say under my depth map, I'm going to choose the layer mask as my depth. And when I come over here and I click on the image itself, I don't know whether you guys can see that well enough, I can choose what part of the image is blurry and what part of it is focal. Let me do it with, there you go, now you can see that. I've made the back wall here in focus. The front here is out of focus. That then changes and puts the front in focus and blurs out the back. Let me change and do it with a daytime view so that maybe you can see it a little bit better. Let me go to Open. I have another set of daytime renders available. Okay, so there's the daytime render. This was that view 3. Same thing, I'm going to go and duplicate the layer. Gives myself a copy of the layer. I'm going to bring in, so let me open up that Z-Depth channel. And where was it? There's the Z-Depth for this one. I'm going to go ahead and copy it, Control A, Control C to copy it. And then back on this layer, I'm going to add a layer mask. And then on the layer mask, I'll go into my channels, and I'm going to paste that on. And there it is as part of this. Now I can go into my Z-Depth. Hopefully this will help you see it. I'll go up to Filter, Blur, Lens Blur. OK. And so again, my depth mask is sourced from the layer mask. And now what I click on will become the focal point, and it'll blur out the background. So if I click, say, further down the wall, the foreground will start to get blurred. Eventually, I can get the background in focus, and it will blur out the foreground. And of course, this stuff never works when you want it to. Let me up this so that this is more clear. There we go. So I just increased how much blur is happening. There you go. Now you can see it in its live point. So I could say something close to me is in focus, but then the background is blurred out. And as I start to click my way back, you'll see that the focal point will change. There it is, where the foreground now is blurry and the background here is blurry, but the middle ground is in focus. So I can actually control what part of the image is in focus after the fact. So it's a really neat effect to be able to do to your post-processing that doesn't cost anything else in your rendering. It's going to render anyway. This just gives you some options for later on. So in this scenario, that's now in focus. The background's blurred out a little bit. I think it shows a little bit easier here. It seems like it's a little bit too strong. That's where you can adjust this radius value. I might drop it to 15. That makes the background not quite so blurry. If I drop it to 10, more of the image will be in focus. So I'm controlling how much of it is blurred out and how much of it isn't. It's just a matter of a preference in terms of look for what you're picking. So in this particular image, I would probably pick this corner as being in focus, and then it's slowly blurring out to the background there. And that helps add a layer of realism to the photograph, because typically that would be like a photograph. So when I'm done, I'll go ahead and say OK, and the blur will then apply. I can then turn it on and turn it off based on this particular layer after the fact. It's harder to see it here. There it is. You can see it happening at the pool level. Let me jump back to the nighttime render here. Blur, lens blur. And I'm going to up this value a little bit. I'm going to go to 20 to hopefully let you see this a little bit more. I'll choose to make the foreground in focus. Yeah. The hard part here is that in this particular image, it's night, so you guys on the screen can't see when it blurs out in the background as well. And so this might be a strategy that's better suited for the daytime render than it is for the nighttime render. Anyway, I wanted to point that out because I've talked about why that channel is important. The same strategies apply using the other masks or the other channels as masks. So if I wanted to collage in something for the ground, or in this case I wanted to collage in something for where the ocean would be, I have the ability to use those channels as well. So I can go ahead and go to File and then Open. You can see some of the other channels here. So my alpha, for example, or my background, these are both important. The background here gives me a mask for where that horizon line. This white area would be the sky, so I could collage in a particular piece of sky using that channel. The alpha tends to have more transparency. Let me see here. The other thing that can be useful is the render ID, which gives me individual colors for everything. It lets me really easily select certain regions. So, for example, let me go ahead and stack all these together on my image here, and I can show you a little bit about how this would work. Let me go to File, Place Embedded, and I'm going to drop in that render ID. And let me go to File, Place Embedded. And I'll drop in the background like that. And so what I can do here on either one of these is I can use this to help me select. So they're not going to affect my image overall, but they are going to affect what I'm choosing to collage in. So if I had a different picture, let's say I wanted to put a different sky in or a different ocean picture, I would go find that picture, whatever it is. So we could do a Google image search. Let's see. And let me use, under Tools here, I'm going to choose size larger than 4 megapixels so I get good results. Labeled for reuse. And so I could take something like this. Oh, I'm going to have to log into that one. We'll use the Wikipedia version because I can download that one for free. Let me save image as, and I'll put it into today's folder. All right. So I have that image. I can bring that image in. Let me go to File and then Place. I need to know where that horizon would be. So that horizon line is about there. That. This is going to end up having to be big enough to go all the way down and cover up that lower edge. So I've now found the background that I'm going to use. I can use these objects here to help me select. So depending on how I want to go about doing it, I can do it here, for example. I will magic wand that plus this. And once I have those two selected, I also should probably select some of the transparency here. We'll get to that in a second. I can then go back to my sailboat here, and I can add a layer mask to cut that part out. And when I turn that off, you can see that I've substituted in that water or that ocean for where the background is. I'm just using the channels to really easily swap things in. I'm getting some weird results through this, though I could probably get away with it. Let's go ahead and I'm going to select, oops, sorry, those pieces that I can see through minus the solid parts of these posts. Oops, sorry, it's Alt is minus. And then with those selected, I can move on to the horizon here. And I'm actually going to, instead of painting in white, I'm going to paint in kind of a gray so that it's semi-transparent on that. So let me use my brush. Let's make this a little bit bigger here. And then we'll see some of that ocean shining through, like that, which is then helping out. So I'm still seeing through it, but I'm not seeing, and it looks like I didn't quite get all of the pieces. I need to make a few adjustments to the mask, but you guys get the idea. So I'm using those tools as a way of helping me do the collage work. So there's a reason that I spent the time to save all these extra pieces, because it's going to help me long term with my selections, etc. Let me go ahead and place in some of the other options. Just trying to see if there's any other ones. Yeah, the lighting and yeah, there's not enough in the rest of these to really help out too much. So I could touch up the edges of those pieces to help see this, but this then changes the look a bit of the rest of this. Now, in this particular scenario, my Z-Depth stopped. The background's in focus now. I would need to go back and redo the Z-Depth with the new background in. The same channel still will apply, but I would need to have this on this layer here for it to work. And so if you wanted to see me do that, easiest thing to do would be to get the view that you like. So let's say it's this one. I've turned off the Z-Depth. I'll go to File and then Save As, and I'll save this as a JPEG. Maximum size, etc. I'll go to File and then Place Embedded. And I just need to, there's my new background. So I can place that in. Basically what I did is I flattened it out and combined everything together. Now I can apply the Z-Depth to this layer. So I'll take my mask and I can just drop it all the way up onto that layer. And then I can go to filter. Sorry, I need to be on the layer itself. There we go. Filter, blur, lens blur. Oh, maybe I already. You just do it fresh. New layer mask, channels. And there it is. And now I can go to filter, blur, lens blur. What? I love it when stuff doesn't work the way you want it to. Oh, I probably have to rasterize this. That's my mistake. Yeah. There, rasterize smart object. There it is. Okay, now I can create the channel or the mask. I can put my Z-depth on it, and then we can come back and we should be able to do the Z-depth of it. So filter, blur, lens blur, there we go. Didn't want to do it of the smart object. Okay, so now that I have it set up like that, I can go back and I can change the focal length of what's in focus and what's out of focus, etc. It's a little bit complicated because of how I did this coming through. Really, this should have a gradient on it as well. It just had to do with how the rendering played it out. But you guys get the sense for what I was trying to accomplish here. So we'll go ahead and say OK, and then I have the ability to blur out the background. The other thing that hasn't happened is the sky wasn't blurred out where it should have been. So I may need to make some modifications on the Z-Depth channel. Let me go ahead. I could just basically paint the sky on that Z-Depth white, and that would change that as well. So I could come up here, and I could paint that out in white, and it would add the blur effect to the rest of it. So it's just modifications. I could do it here. Basically, I would take that piece and then paint it out in white, so that the sky was blurred out as well. And so it would just take a little bit of modification to do that correctly. Anyway, so that's the Z-Depth channel and some of the stuff that you can do in Photoshop. I didn't want to consume too much of your time today because I wanted to let you guys just work. I know you're all getting there, you're getting close, and so I will turn you loose and let you finish out your work. I will pass out the grade sheets so that you can go back through it. I'll be honest, I'm a little concerned with some of the grade sheets because there's a lot of missing work, a lot of exercises that haven't been turned in, a lot of pieces of assignments that haven't been turned in. So I would go back through and double check things that you've missed. Make sure you repost them so that you can get credit for them. All right, let me know if you have any other questions.